And we've also increased our property. Originally conveyed to us in 2011, we now have 13 total acres. So everything that you see here on that site, including the parking lot, all the way through the back where it's mostly low, and all the way down to the other buildings here. CMU, we have worked with CMU in cooperation with a lot of different things. The archaeological team has come in and they've done ground penetrating radar in some of the fields right here. And ground penetrating radar is kind of like a sonar device that looks down to see, and they're looking for abnormalities. However they put it. But anyway, they're trying to look and see because the historic issue of what you heard earlier, they discovered 225 names of students that have perished either at the boarding school or they were shipped back home to their parents and they passed on en route back home. So some of these children had never seen their parents once they became here, and then they would find out that their children had died. There have been news articles that have been published in the county paper way back during the boarding school era, where it described the native savage. This lady come here to take her kids back home. And she kind of kidnapped her own kids to take them back home. And in the papers, they called her a native savage, on the warpath. There's a couple other different things. I can't remember them offhand, but it was actual print of how they described the Native Americans at that time and how they were she was brutally beaten by 2 male federal agents that went to retrieve the children and bring them back here. As you can think, all she wanted is her kids to come back home and to be with her. A lot of these children were taken away from their parents. Not all things here were bad. There are a lot of good things that came out of the school. You hear more of the bad things and the atrocities that had happened during the boarding school era. So we'll go ahead and keep moving as we're talking, but I had the opportunity to travel to Wisconsin, the Oneida tribe, and interview one of the oldest living survivors of the boarding school that lived here. Now, she couldn't speak any English. Her name was Maria Hinton. She was supposed to come back to the boarding school during the ceremonies that we hold here on June 6th. But her health had deteriorated, and she ended up passing away before she could make it back. But I have had the honor to go there, and we documented the history that she would talk about when she attended here. She has a really good life. She has a lot of good experiences from the boarding school era, and she had went on to be a very powerful woman in education and things in her life. So she has some really good things to say about it. And so one of the things that I would like to share with you that she shared with us during that interview is she was about 3 or 4 years old when she first went to a boarding school, and I believe it was Wisconsin where she was at. And the boarding school is only down the street from where she lived. But because they were poor, their parents couldn't hardly take care of them, she went with her siblings to the boarding school. So the boarding school had a fence around it and kept the kids in there. She wasn't really old enough because if you look at it, they wouldn't take children under the age of 5 or 6. But she was 3 or 4 years old, and she describes that. She describes that she knew that her parents loved her because on Saturday mornings they'd be playing out in the yard, and her dad would come down in a horse and buggy. They had the only white horses, and she knew it was him, and she knew that he loved them because he would drive by without looking at them. They couldn't have any contact with their parents. Without looking at her or acknowledging her, he threw candy over the fence for the children.
Oh.
So that was one of her things that she said. She knew her parents loved her, but because they loved her so much, they wanted a life for her. So like I said, not all bad things have happened at the boarding school era. So I wanted to point that out because we were able to go and we were able to capture that as part of the history of boarding school here that she attended. So this is a chapel and auditorium here. This year we do have pictures of what the building looks like on the outside, and we have some pictures of the building, what it looks like on the inside. This building here we did go into in 2011 as the initial tour. When we were looking at taking conveyance of the buildings, we were going through looking at things, and if you look at picture number 11, This is a padded room. This padded room is right up here. The first window on this side here.
Sorry.
And this room sticks out to us because not only is it the auditorium or chapel area, but it's a padded room that has no doorknob on the inside. It locked from the outside. So there were thoughts of that children were being put in this room because they were bad or to be punished. But then others have come back and say, no, it was a room that they would go into to practice their instruments without disturbing the rest of the individuals in the building. So we do have two conflicting stories. You know, you leave it up to yourself to determine what happens and things like that. But as we did go into the buildings, there was a lot of obstacles and a lot of hazards within the buildings, so we had to be very careful. We would love to take people inside the buildings, but with the age of the buildings and the deteriorating status of them, we just find that it's too risky and too hazardous for taking big groups in the buildings. We used to have a tour that would go inside the gymnasium, but that building has started to become more unsafe. And we'll talk a little bit more about that once we get around the other side there. But if you want to look at it and you get time a little bit later today, you can come back and look at some of the pictures. It does show about the proximity of where each picture is taken in each room. The committee is working towards that. We have had structural analysis done on some of the buildings, and a lot of them are in really bad shape to really restore to their status what they had. But we just want to try to preserve as much as we can. A lot of the roofs are caving in because of neglect, and the roof needed to be repaired, things like that. So we are looking at trying to cover them up, making sure that we kind of preserve the buildings as much as we can until a straight decision is done. Now we have talked about recreating the reflecting pond out here with an eternal flame and things like that. But you know, those are still in the works. And we're trying to look at we have applied and looking for grant money for those because this is technically a brownfield. So some government money would be able to be used to help clean up and restore the property from some of the lead paint that's leached down into the soil and some of the lead and asbestos that's inside the buildings, like asbestos ceiling tiles and floor tiles, things like that. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I got a question, Greg.
Yes.
I know that, like, I'm a tribal member. Am I allowed to like walk on the grounds or not? You don't have to walk my dog.
Oh, yeah.
From walking or trespassing because there are a lot of hazards on the property.
Oh, okay.
Because if you get close to the buildings at the right time, a brick or something could fall out. I can show you down here. We have a tree growing out of the top of the bricks.
Oh, okay.
So there are a lot of hazards on the property. And that's why we really try to tell you to be careful and watch what you're doing. But as a tribal member, I can't say yes or no because it is a tribal.
I mean, I don't want to be arrested. I mean, I've never been in the clinker, but
we do have a cooperation between all 5 police agencies around that they come and they patrol the area because we do have people that vandalize the buildings and get into the buildings. And we have found where people have broken into the buildings just to either search around or do what they need to do.
no, it's pretty ground.
So it is a problem for us to have people out here walking around because if you're out here walking around, other people will say, well, we can go out there and you know we just want to try to deter people from coming and breaking in, and then with all the hazards. Anything else?
I totally forgot I could take video. Thank you for reminding me.
Well, you don't have to remember everything.
Right. Probably be a little shaky, but...
All right, so I'll introduce you here to Sarah Surface Evans. She's with CMU and she did some of the archaeological studies and things that were on the building. And she'll describe some of the posters that are sitting around.
So in addition to the posters that have photos of the insides of the buildings, there's a few posters around that show buildings that are no longer standing that we've done archaeology on. So in finding out and recovering that information about those lost buildings, it was multiple steps in order to do that. First, we looked into historical documents and records, maps and photographs to see what used to be standing here, because in addition to the buildings that are here today, there were over 50 other buildings that were part of the boarding school because it was basically a work farm. So there were many, many structures that supported all of the labor that students had to do here. So one of the structures that we found that was kind of a surprise because it's not marked in any of the maps is a gazebo or bandstand. And the bandstand actually stood right out there. There's a huge maple tree just on the edge of the reflecting pond. It's hard to see beyond this pine, but just south of that huge maple tree, which is right here in this photo, I'm actually standing closer to the road looking back at this building. In this historic photo, the maple tree is this little bitty sapling.
Wow.
So there were no maps that showed the gazebo or bandstand, but we found some photographs that showed it. So we did some excavation and we did GPR work in this area, and the ground penetrating radar, or GPR, discovered that there were some sort of anomaly below the ground. And when we did excavation, we found out that that anomaly was cobblestones. So there was a cobblestone sort of foundation in which the pillars of the gazebo once stood. And the gazebo was an intentional design of the school. While we might think of a gazebo as sort of being a pleasure place where people might sit and dine and relax, there was actually a bandstand or gazebo at the very first boarding school, Carlisle. So Carlisle started out as a barracks that was repurposed to be an Indian boarding school. And the bandstand there was in the middle of their sort of marching grounds, and all of the buildings where students lived and worked were kind of situated around that. And Pratt himself, who was a big tall guy, he was 6 foot something, would stand on the bandstand and just sort of watch. And he would watch the students and mentally note who was misbehaving or doing something that he didn't want them to do. And then he would shame them publicly by writing a column that was called "The Man on the Bandstand" in the Indian Helper, which was the school newspaper at Carlisle. So it was kind of a form of control for him to be able to use that space to observe and watch the children and then shame them publicly in the newspaper so that they would behave. Okay? So we don't know if the superintendents of the Mount Pleasant School did that sort of thing because we haven't been able to find any student newspapers. But I can imagine that there was probably a similar role. If you look at boarding schools across the nation, all several hundred of them, they almost all have a reflecting pond and a bandstand right next to them. So they were symbols of the power of the institution, if you will, and a place where the superintendents could entertain guests, because dignitaries, from Lansing and from other places, federal dignitaries would come here to observe the experiment that was the school and see if the social re-education was working. And that was a place where they could have those dignitaries visit and observe the children. So they brought with them, and because all their personal belongings were taken from them when they came to the school, we imagine that they probably hid them, maybe in the foundation of the bandstand, to make sure that the teachers and the superintendent and things like that, they spent money on this imposing feature here, again, to show the power of the institution at the school and magnify the importance of this building here, the school and chapel building. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Sarah. In the windows of some of the children. And I'll point out one of the trees back here where the people are standing in the reflecting pond, the tree right there. If you're standing back by the teepee area and you look back at this tree here, they call it the tree of faces, right? So as you're looking at it, it looks like it's faces of children and people as the way you look at it. But as you move closer to it, you see that it's just knots and things the way the tree grew. So there are some myths, nothing that's really been proven or actually experienced. But we leave it open to consideration and open to the mind, because if you do see something, everybody sees a little something at the corner of their eyes. We don't want to push that off or brush that off as not really happening, but we would like to believe that during the events and things here, that the ancestors and the children are here with us, and they're happy that we are bringing back something that they were not allowed to do. They were not allowed to beat on the drum. They were not allowed to sing. They were not allowed to dance. So those are things, they were not allowed to hear their language. They were stripped of their language. So those are things that we have brought back here to help them and to help us remember and honor them because of what they weren't able to experience.
One of our friends saw a little girl in a white dress by one of the no trespassing signs. about 1 in the morning. She was coming down this road, and she startled. Oh my gosh, there's a little girl. We got to stop and help her. And she went back. She was gone. She wasn't drowned. She wasn't making up a story, but that's what she said. So I just wanted to know more accounts.
I worked here for 34 years. When all these buildings were open, they were the state hospital. This was a chapel. We took the boys to church, or the girls. That was building 3. That was building 1. That was the boys. That was the girls. And they had the infirmed in there too. My wife worked in that building.
Okay.
One night, one afternoon, was another guy. And I'm not into all this,
Yeah.
but I believe in spirits. And
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, he said, "Did you see that?" And I did. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was. It was a mist. I saw it, and it was gone. But when I worked here, there was 1,300 physically challenged patients in this building. All this 328. And then, they put them in a lot of placement, stuff like that. And then they used this for activity in church. That was the best place to go in the summertime because it was so cool down there. You go in the basement, it was nice and cool. They painted things on the wall. When I first hired in, I did every one of these buildings up through Wood. And those other buildings, I went through most all of them. The gym, everybody used to go to the gym and we play basketball.
All right, let's go ahead and keep moving so we can keep the tour going. Yes, sir. This was one of the areas where you did ground penetrating radar, correct?
We did, yes. Always on here were utilities. No, there's no building in this area. But we did shovel testing in this area, and so the girls' dormitory. How many of you have heard the story about Martha Shaganabby? Martha Shaganabby. Okay, so in 1899, Martha Shaganabby set fire to this building and burned it to the ground. So this was rebuilt. Yeah. Yes. And so we didn't do any big excavations in this area, but we did some small shovel tests in this sort of space here between these buildings. And we found lots of burnt wood and glass and things that suggested there was definitely a fire here. And in fact, I think it's on the laundry building poster. Once we get there, I'll point it out. You can see in one of the photos I have there, one of the historic photos, you can actually see the leveled ground where this building had been burnt down, and they leveled it. And it took them actually several years before they were able to rebuild it.
So this building was one of the original buildings during the 2011 conveyance that we actually walked into. We entered the building through the back and through the basement area. And when we got in there, in the basement area, there's a lot of hospital equipment down there. Some of it was modern from the Mount Pleasant Center era that they used for storage and things. But there were a few items in there that were wooden wheelchairs. And there was a wooden gurney type with stirrups, which led to believe, or some say that they were doing the sterilization of some of the students that were here. But we haven't really been able to prove a lot of that. It's just a lot of theory, but it's just things that we've witnessed when we went into the buildings and things. So be very careful when you come up to the buildings here, because we do have some loose bricks and things that are up there. And as we get up here, you see the cornerstone here. It does show in reflect when the building was burned. Did you hear that? And he's taking pictures, and then all of a sudden, something flew out of that hole between my legs, and he about jumped in my arms screaming. You know, my heart dropped to my toe. I didn't know what it was, but you know, we think it was a cat. He got a picture of a tail when he snapped. So, you know, there are a lot of things.
Was it a fox?
We don't know. There were only 5 deaths. So the Zebraing Center has uncovered 225. Like I said, most of those have died. They were sick enough when they left the hospital that they did not make it home. So because they did not make it home, that means that they have perished here. And some of the people that have gone to school here have put on statement that the woods to the north on the other side of the parking lot there that the city owns, that they remember seeing little white crosses and things in there. But again, we haven't been able to document any of that. It's just been some of the wording and stuff that some of the other survivors or attendees of the boarding school has actually experienced or has said something about.
So they're working to get like the student records, or you have the student records?
There's a lot of records that we can't get into because they're closed. Once a certain amount of time passes, then those files could be opened. But until they open up some of those files, we're not going to be able to get the documentation from them.
But that's something that you're hoping to...
Not even through the Freedom of Information, because there's certain personal information in some of the records that are... What's that?
FERPA is the law that all student files locked for a certain number of years. I think it's like 80 or 90 years.
That's why I can't get grandma's.
All of those.
The Zipwing Center has gone to Lansing, they've gone to Washington.
They'll be accessible through the National Archives. Some of them are old enough to be, open.
But I guess my question is that something that you're not only interested in the physical, but you're also interested in maybe getting documentation from the student files if possible to amass them?
Yeah. They're slowly working towards that. Every time they find something, they make copies and stuff and bring it back to the Zipwing Center. So this...
Great, that's good to know.
So this is the administration building slash
Is it
what they call home economics and things like that. I have not personally been inside this building. A later tour of the committees, when they actually took conveyance of this portion of the building, this was a building that was added on and given to the tribe as a historical aspect of it after the initial conveyance in 2011. So there's pictures and things here that show exactly what the building looks like on the inside. And this is where some of like the dean or the head person of the boarding school would have stayed. They have found a lot of things along here as some of the perks that they received, like she said, some of the steak bones and things like that. So they ate a lot better than some of the students that were here, because some of the students that have perished here have perished because of malnutrition. You know, a lot of it you see on the death certificates and things that they died of consumption. Well, at that time, consumption meant a lot of different things and not just drinking for alcohol or things. It was a way that they formed for tuberculosis and stuff like that. So tuberculosis was documented on some of the birth certificates or death certificates that it was consumption. So, but there was a lot of malnutrition. A lot of the students started their day at daybreak. They would get up in the mornings, they would make their beds, they would go down for breakfast, and then they would go out and they would work in the fields. They would work because it was a working type farm where they made their own foods and things and helped service the community as well. So then in the afternoon, they would come back and they would all go inside and go to their schooling. So their day was pretty packed all the way from sunrise to sunset. So it was very structured. So we'll go ahead and keep moving along this way before the other tour comes along. Where all the students were in their white shirts and pants.
Right. I was wondering about that earlier, remember? But they need to have a little plaque.
Marbles, she said some beads and things, and he also found a button that said U.S. Indian Services on it. So feel free after we're done here to go ahead and come back and look at it as the hospital. And again, the CMU building here will show some of the stuff that was found. And when I talk about the button that was found, this is the button here that depicts the button that says U.S. Indian Services on it to the United States government. When the actual Mount Pleasant Center finally closed, I believe they closed in 2008. But they used to utilize a lot of these buildings, and the gymnasium, when we took the original conveyance and went into the gymnasium, we were amazed at how good of a shape that building was in. It was clean. We sat in the bleachers. We looked around, and there were basketballs and all this other stuff in there. So they used that as a recreational area, for the Mount Pleasant student or Mount Pleasant Center patients and things for their exercise and things like that. So they fully utilized some of the buildings until that point, and then they started deteriorating to the point where they didn't want to upkeep them or anything like that. So
I guess my question is, did they give it to you, additional buildings, because it was the right thing to do, or because they were in bad shape and it was like, let them deal with it?
I want to say all of the above, but I believe we had to fight for some of the historical portions. We couldn't fight, and we originally tried to fight for the whole 320 acres because it was historic to the tribe and historic to the native perspective, but we ended up with what we had. I can tell you that the city has spent a lot of money to remove the buildings and things on their properties. The buildings here, just to remove the lead and asbestos and take care of the cleanup, not to restore the buildings, was in $6 to $8 million range, and that's just to do environmental cleanup.
Now, if there were bodies found in the 320 acres, like a burial field, would that renew your claim at all to the 320?
That would be more of a legal aspect of it, as far as Native American remains. How many of you are aware of the Stone Street project in Flint, where the tribe now owns certain acreage there in Flint because they found Native American remains there?
Yeah.
So it's a process that they have to go through. It is costly, but I fully don't understand the legal aspect on that side of it. So I wouldn't say yes or no, but if it does happen, when they start excavating, they have to be culturally sensitive to the area because it is a state historic site, and now it's mandated to the national level. So once they start to break ground, in my old position when they were removing the buildings and things, my old position was in the environmental aspect where I had to be on site and oversee a lot of the environmental cleanup for asbestos and lead on their portions. So I was actively involved in parts of the city's construction phases here. If they were to uncover any remains, then that would go above me and beyond. But as far as that goes, they're more than willing to be proactive with the tribe.
So somebody will be here when they decide to develop it. Somebody from the tribe will be here to be like a little bit of a watchdog.
Possibly on oversight, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You'll be able to see, as you see some of the stuff that's boarded up, those are areas where trespassers have broken into the buildings. We've continuously tried to keep people out because it is unsafe inside the buildings. We don't want anybody to get in there, get hurt, and then have to find them later. That's always a bad thing. Be very careful when you come around here. When we first took conveyance of the buildings in 2011, this was the building we went in first. We entered through the door down here, which led to the basement where I was talking about, where we had the hospital equipment that was stored from the Mount Pleasant Center, and then some of them that were all wooden. You could tell the ones that were stored from the Mount Pleasant Center because they were made of metal. The other ones were made of mostly wood and rubber. This is the only building that we have identified that's had an elevator.
Oh.
Like I said, when we first took conveyance of the buildings, the person from the state told us that we had better not take any pictures or have anything show up on Facebook until we actually took conveyance of the buildings. So we recommend you take pictures, post on Facebook, do what you need. Gets the word out there, helps us restore the property and bring attention to it.
Get your dollars worth, right?
Yeah.
Does any of the casino operation funds help restore this? Or?
The casino operation funds will help restore a lot of things, but we're looking to incorporate a lot of the government funding because they were or used to be government run buildings. So any type of government grants we can get would be more than welcome. But it's a long process, long process. This is the gymnasium, what I talked about. When we originally went into this building, we thought it was the best building that we had. That, oh my God, it's in great shape. The Mount Pleasant Center used to utilize this building all the way up until they closed their facilities. So if you look at some of the pictures and stuff here, how good it was, if you see the one picture, I think it's number 9, that writing was never there. That graffiti was never there. That's active day individuals breaking into the buildings, trespassing, and leaving their mark. So as we did structural analysis on all the buildings to see what it would cost to restore or which ones were not worth saving, we were disappointed to find out that this building is the worst. This building is the worst. If you look up in the very top corner, see the plate with the screw in it? That screw goes all the way to the other side. That's holding this building together. So we were disappointed when we got results for that and told us that this was not the very best structurally sound building they had. When inside it looked like it was the best. When we took conveyance of the buildings, the gym floor was all wood, nice. It was still played on. After the city took conveyance of their portions, they cut the water and electricity off to the side. The pipes broke on the inside, water fell down and ruined the floor. You know, it's just one of those things that happened. Nobody really thought that the water was still running on this side. So it's one of those things. As we move on here, it's like we're running out a little bit of time. The next building here is the woodshop carpentry area. And some of the individuals we've talked to, I'd like to point out one part where we call the Wall of Tears. And the reason why we call it the Wall of Tears is some people actually have carved names, initials, and dates that to show that they were here. You know, just like little kids. Kids do all over the place. They carve their names and this and that. I was here. If you come up and you look at very few debris on the floor, very little paint peeling off the walls, and it had to be used during the Mount Pleasant Center era because there were toys and things, newer toys, that were boxed up and put in the corner. But without knowing exactly what happened or why that room in this building that was in disarray was kept like that, it made us feel a little uncomfortable, and we didn't fully want to enter that room. So we just stayed at the door, you know, just thought about it, turned around and we walked out. We didn't want to touch anything because if there were still children or something that was there, we wanted to leave them there with some good thoughts because there were toys there. They were keeping it, that room was clean and kept that nice compared to the rest of the building for a reason. So it was just something that we decided not to pursue and go into that building or that room. And I can show you which room that is on the picture in front. And growing up, she would always talk about how the nuns would come through. She was left-handed, and she would always tell us how she was writing with her left hand. The nuns would come along and slap her hands and tell her that was the devil coming out in her. She would always talk about how she had to go, and she peeled potatoes. I would have to peel potatoes for dinner at night on some occasions, and you know, she would come and push me out of the way and take some of the peelings and just barely get the skin off those. And then she would always sit down and she would tear boxes up to make more room in the trash cans and things like that. And there was a lot of things, like in her room she would stuff magazines under her bed to make it, you know, a little more warmer and things like that. So there were just little things that were going on. The thing that I remember most is I grew up with my grandparents. I lived with my grandmother and my grandfather. I cared for them once they got older. When I was 13 to 16 years old, I helped care for them and take care of some of the responsibilities and things as growing up with my grandparents. But the thing that I remember the most is I hated coming home after school because at 4 o'clock every day I would get hit with a broomstick for no apparent reason. I couldn't figure it out until I found out about the boarding school era and found out that my grandmother had been a part of that era. To this day, I like to tell everybody that I have broken that cycle because my kids have never felt my hand or my wife's hand on them, but they know their history. They know where their grandparents came from, they know where I came from, and they know that I love them, and I show them that different love, but I also show them and teach them that this is what could happen. And I tell them the good and the bad,
Right.
that you have to look at both sides of the story before you make a judgment.